Welcome to the Pastor Scott Show. Call Pastor Scott now at 888-528-2557. That's 888-528-2557. And now, here's Pastor Scott.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Pastor Scott Show. Go to PastorScottShow.com to connect with us online, PastorScottShow.com. You follow us on social media, podcast, live stream, everything is at PastorScottShow.com. Phone number is 888-528-2557. Join the conversation. We talk about issues of the day from a Christian perspective on the Pastor Scott Show. And if you listen regularly, one of the big issues of the day that you'll hear us talk about is the ideologies that are dominating really our discussion. And with me to talk about that is the author of a new book. The new book is called Post-Woke, Asserting a Biblical Vision of Race, Gender, Sexuality. And the author is Neal Shelvey, co-authored by Patrick Sawyer. You can go to postwokebook.com to find it or anywhere books are sold. Neal Shelvey, welcome to the Pastor Scott Show.
Thank you, Pastor Scott. Good to be here.
Hey, great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a homeschooling theoretical chemist. I worked at Yale and Duke until about 11 years ago when I quit my job to homeschool my 4 kids to devote myself to writing and speaking. So that's why I'm here now.
There you go. And you went to Yale and Duke, and you're writing about post-woke. Now, how did that happen? How did you come around to that? You're homeschooling your kids. I think that's some of the clue there. Why has your life and maybe God's ministry in your life taken you this direction?
Well, like many of us, I was sort of shocked and confused by what was happening around 2017, 2016 with the rise of Black Lives Matter. I knew that something was happening in the culture and even seeping into the church. I couldn't put my finger on what it was. So I began reading voraciously primary sources related to critical race theory, queer theory, critical pedagogy, and realized we're dealing with a new worldview or a new pseudo-religion even that is consuming secular society, but also is even infiltrating the church. And so I began to write and speak about it.
Because it was way beyond what people might imagine with Black Lives Matter, or the idea of, hey, we do need to pay attention to what's happening to people and black people and the black communities and those kinds of things. It's way beyond that. You talked about critical theory and all of that. You know, I think that when you get into this, and you touched on it a second ago, you realize that really this is a religion, that this is ideology and religion. It's way beyond matters of just race or even just the issues, that there's something more happening.
That's right. I mean, I think Black Lives Matter perfectly encapsulates that dynamic. I mean, a lot of people that were saying Black Lives Matter, and all they meant was that black people are made in God's image like all the rest of us. Amen to that their lives matter. Of course they do. All lives matter. They're trying to express that. Yet they didn't realize that behind that hashtag was an organization that was explicitly committed to things like decentering the nuclear family or uplifting black trans folk and fostering a queer-centric movement. These are all phrases from their statement of beliefs on their website.
Right on their website.
So, there you go.
And most people weren't on that page, so that right. I think is so interesting.
So, and it's not like this is dead. I mean, Black Lives Matter has kind of gone out of the public eye, kind of caught in scandals, various kinds. But just some data that people think we're beyond woke, it's gone, it's dead because Trump's reelected now. But about 1 in 4 Gen Z people identify as transgender, LGBTQ+. So it's a huge number identifying under that umbrella category. If you ask, there's a survey done in 2023 of people, and they asked, there's an ideology that says that white people are oppressors. Do you believe that ideology? And 80% of boomers said, no, we don't. But 80% of Gen Z said, yes, we do. So if people think wokeness is dead, keep in mind that our younger generation is awash in these ideas. They're going to be our next generation of pastors, diplomats, politicians, lawyers, doctors. So if you're a parent, I'm begging you, please don't believe this triumphalistic narrative that wokeness is over and dead. It's not. It's going to come roaring back, and it's still out there in culture and in colleges. So please equip your kids, even if they're going to Christian schools. They likely, unfortunately, will encounter these ideas.
So how do we talk about this in a way that is able to cut through a lot of the, I mean, I think political correctness is almost an old term, right? It's a thing but it gets through some of that. You're listening to the Pastor Scott Show. My guest is Neal Shelvey. He's the author of a new book called Post-Woke, Asserting a Biblical Vision of Race, Gender, and Sexuality. My sons are high school, and it's so interesting hearing them and their friends, on the one hand, you have a lot of young people who are going to church maybe at a higher number, and people are saying revival. But on the other hand, I wonder if the religious revival we're seeing is some people are following Christ, but others are following something else. How do we, in the church, deal with that?
I think the key is we have to give them a positive vision of race, gender, and sexuality. It's not enough to simply be anti-woke, because you can be anti-woke and wrong in various ways. For example, neo-Nazis are anti-woke. They're very opposed to racial egalitarianism, but they're racist. They're just traditionally racist. So we want to just say, no, the Bible gives us the proper way to think about, say, ethnicity. That yes, it is part of your identity. It's fine to be white or black or Hispanic or Asian. Like Paul, Paul enjoyed and reveled in being Jewish. That was part of his ethnic identity, and yet he said it's all rubbish compared to knowing Jesus. That we have something bigger than our ethnicity to unite us across those lines of class and race. And so that's one way. Another way with gender, to say that no, gender is not a social construct, that gender is rooted in our DNA. God made us male and female, and that whatever gender categories we have in culture, like what is masculine, what is feminine, whatever those things are, like who wears dresses, who wears color blue, whatever it is, that's rooted in our biology. We should express ourselves socially the way that God has made us to be, to say, I love the way God created me. And sexuality, well, God gave us a pattern for marriage that should be honored by all human beings. He made us male and female to be united in marriage, and that we should honor that, and that all sexual relationships outside of a covenant marriage between a man and a woman are sin. And we can say that clearly and firmly, but also in a way that acknowledges that all of us have fallen short of God's design in one way or another. All of us have broken his law and therefore need salvation through Jesus.
When we talk about this idea of a oppressor-oppressed relationship and an ideology behind that, obviously there are people who are oppressed and there are oppressors in this world, but explain that ideology and especially I think how it breaks down, because the way I look at it, tell me if I'm wrong too, but the way I look at it is that it's like, well, you might be the oppressed in this analogy, but you're also the oppressor here. Or if you start to do better in society, suddenly you move from not becoming somebody who is successful, who has overcome something, but now you're the oppressor of some other group of people who hasn't achieved what you've achieved. Is that right to say that ideology sort of informs that thinking, and then it just drives everybody down eventually, I think?
Right. There's so much wrong with how critical theory frames these ideas. I think people ask me, what's the fountainhead of all of critical theory's errors? And I think it's the fact they've redefined the word oppression. Like they've redefined so many words like marriage, gender, sexuality, justice, morality, truth. But they redefined oppression to refer not to traditionally how cruelty and injustice and tyranny impacted actual people, individuals. That's not how they redefined oppression. They redefined oppression to refer to ways in which the ruling class, whether it's whites or men or heterosexuals or Christians, impose their values on culture in a way that seems natural and normal and objective and even common sense and God ordained, and yet is an arbitrary way that the ruling class justifies their power and privilege. So they would see any societal norms at all that say this is the way that God has designed the universe. They see that as oppression. So for example, the gender binary is oppression because it says there are two categories of male and female. Anything outside of that is outside of God's design. Well, they would say that's oppression. Just male and female itself is oppression. Or the idea that we're living in a white supremacist society because white supremacy has been defined as all of these quote-unquote white norms, which, for example, the Smithsonian Institute had an infographic saying that things like hard work is the key to success, that the nuclear family is the center of the society, ideas like, I kid you not, rational linear thinking. These were all elements of white culture. This was at the Smithsonian Institute's National Museum of African American History and Culture in 2020. That sounds so crazy, yet they're claiming that those ideas are all part of white supremacist culture. So this is a way that critical theory has poisoned everything. I mean, we have to say that science is not a white thing. Science and a reason and objectivity are not elements of a whiteness. They are part of how God has designed the universe and wants all human beings to function rationally. So that I just right off the bat, you have to understand that they've redefined so many words. So they'll say things like, "Aren't you anti-oppression?" You can't say yes. You need to say, "Please define your terms," because they've redefined those categories in a way that are very subtle but very dangerous.
I think that is one of the best responses, is you've got to define the terms, because what you think the term means is not what it means anymore, even if that's what it meant 10 minutes ago. It changes, right? And that's, I think when people hear, and you're listening to the Pastor Scott Show, my guest is Neil Chevney, the author of a new book called Post-Woke. And I think this is a hard conversation for a lot of people to have, because in academia, this has been going on for decades, and this movement here, but it's still kind of new for people. Like critical theory, how would you even describe? People, I think, hear the term critical race theory, but they don't realize that there's a whole bunch of critical theory. That's just one chapter of it. There's
Exactly
a whole bunch of critical. What is it? How would you simplify that for people who want to define a term or have this conversation?
Great question. So a critical theory is a tradition that goes all the way back to Karl Marx, who's seen as sort of the first true critical theorist. Why? Because he was interested in how power circulates within society to create winners and losers, oppressors and oppressed. Now, Marx saw everything in terms of money and class and economics. So the oppressors were the bourgeois, the rich people, and the oppressed were the factory workers, the proletariat. But later critical theorists in the Frankfurt School wanted to expand Marx's vision to categories like mass media and culture, and these subtle ways in which the powerful disguise their oppression of the powerless. But even that was in the 1920s and 30s. Since then, critical theory has become this umbrella category, which, as you said, encompasses disciplines like critical race theory, queer theory, critical pedagogy, post-colonial theory. And all of these various critical theories divide society into oppressors and oppressed, but along different lines: race, or class, or gender, or sexuality. And then in 1989, 1991, critical race theorist Kimberly Crenshaw defined the term intersectionality, which fuses all these disciplines. Effectively, it says you can't just look at race, you can't just look at gender, you can't just look at sexuality. You have to analyze all of them together, because our experiences are qualitatively different if we're at the intersection of multiple oppressions. So if we're a black woman, we have a different qualitative experience of oppression than, say, a white woman or a black man. And that had the effect of saying all of these critical theories are brought together within this intersectional framework to give us essentially the wokeness we see today.
I think that as we talk about that, there's a certain level of, people might say, well, obviously the life experience maybe of a black woman in America versus a white woman in America is going to be different in a lot of ways. Sometimes it's because of racism or economics or other things. And so there's truth to that. So how did we get to the issue of dealing with poverty or dealing with economic systems or those kinds of things to a place where we can no longer define what a woman even is if we get to that point? How did we get there?
Let me just say, you're asking incredibly good questions, because one of the things we say in the book is we don't want to combat wokeness by rejecting the category of justice or oppression, which are biblical categories. God demands that we work for the vulnerable, that we enact biblical justice. So we can't just dispense with those categories. The question is to ask, how are you defining justice? Who gets to decide what justice is? And the answer, of course, is the Bible. But how did we get there? Well, one of the things that intersectionality does is it posits something called standpoint epistemology. This is the idea that those of us who are privileged, who are oppressors because you're white or male or heterosexual or Christian, that you're blinded by the injustice of society, because you have privilege in ways that you can't control, but that blinds you to the reality of social injustice. Whereas people that are oppressed, whether they're women or people of color, that they can see reality accurately, and therefore they have the authority to speak to what's actually true. But because of that, because Crenshaw tells us we have to look to the margins to understand society, because of that, you get a very twisted version of justice, which actually ends up showing partiality to the poor, right, or to the person of color, or towards women, etc., in a way that God condemns. Leviticus 19:15 explicitly says that, do no unrighteousness and justice don't favor the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness judge your neighbor. So what I'm saying is, I'm not claiming that we should not pay attention to the claims of anybody. We should all listen to everyone. We can't preferentially say this class of person has the truth and we just don't because we're a straight white male, for example. We are to seek to use equal weights and measures to test everything against the Word of God and objective evidence. and then come to an impartial conclusion. And all of that is obliterated by standpoint epistemology. So I think, again, it's key to understand these concepts rather than just having this knee-jerk reaction of, well, that's just Marxism. It's actually complicated. And if you diagnose it as just something that can be answered by a 20-second TikTok video, you're going to lose your kids because they're going to have been exposed to, say, a year's worth of critical social theory and sociology 101 class. They'll come home trying to tell you what they've learned, and rather than engaging it competently and accurately, you're going to caricature it. So you want to make sure you have a decent grasp on these ideas and can actually provide a biblical way to counter them.
You're listening to the Pastor Scott Show. My guest is Neil Shevney. He is the author of a brand new book. It's called Post-Woke, Asserting a Biblical Vision of Race, Gender, Sexuality. And, as we talk about this, I think in the church, I think we're behind in understanding. My older son is pretty keen to the idea that we're not teaching the right stuff to the kids because, fortunately we didn't let him get a cell phone for a long time, so he really didn't have social media until more recently. And I've craftily gone in there and made sure he's following certain people to fix his algorithm. But he has come across so much understanding of all this, and he goes, none of my friends get this at all. None of my church friends. It's not taught. It's not taught in youth groups, not taught from the pulpit. In fact, we got a little bit from the pulpit recently, and he was so excited about that. How do we, as the church, and dealing with the sensitivity of real issues that are existing now when it comes to maybe racism or different kinds of discrimination, certainly the past that is a part of our country, how do we deal with that to be able to say, no, the way that this is being approached now is making things worse. It's not truth. It is going to cause more and more division. How does the church take a step in the right direction to say, let's address this fairly?
Wow, man, there's so many ways and great insight there that we have to equip kids and our congregants. I would just say, number one, start talking honestly about history, maybe not during the sermon and from the pulpit, but just in communities. Our book has a whole chapter on the history of race, for example, and from slavery through the Black Codes of Jim Crow, just treating it honestly. Because as Christians, we're not ultimately citizens of the United States. We're citizens of the kingdom of heaven. Now, I love my country. America's the greatest country in the world. And yet we can say, look, our country's history, like every country's history, is a mixture of justice and injustice. So, I teach American history for 11th grade homeschool co-op, and I talk about, there's a whole textbook about the history of America, and it includes the dark chapters as well. And I say, let's just learn this stuff because we want to sympathize with people who've experienced racism or who've experienced it ourselves. And while doing that, we don't have to concede an inch to these false narratives that are suffusing our culture. From the pulpit, what I would say to pastors is don't shy away from giving a biblical perspective on these issues. I actually had to preach a sermon 2 weeks ago at a church in Boston I was visiting, and the pastor asked me to preach about race, gender, and sexuality. And I thought, well, I don't want to eisegete the text. I'm not going to read it into a passage that's not there. But I went to Genesis 1:27, where God creates man. And I just talked about, first, what did the Genesis teach about just who human beings are. But then I applied that to issues that are important in our topics, in our culture today. So I said, well, what does Genesis 1, verses 26 through 28 actually teach us about race? And the answer is there's one race, the human race. We're all made in the image of God, and we descended from Adam. What about gender? Well, it says right in the text, we're male and female. Then finally, sexuality, the answer is marriage. We're brought together, man and woman, husband and wife, in marriage, and therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife. So it's all right there. It's right there in the text. But we should have to have the courage and the clarity to teach what the Bible says about these topics, and we can do so in a way that is very, very, I think, ironic and gentle towards people who are just very confused right now. And I think one thing to emphasize always is that we're not coming to you as the superior moral Pharisee who's telling you all the ways you've fallen short of God's law and to be better like us. We are coming to you as fellow sinners who've broken God's law and therefore need his mercy in Christ. And I think that is a way, it doesn't make people always like you, but at least it shows them that you're not motivated by hatred, you're motivated by love.
I think that's all good stuff there and a good place to start. My guest is Neil Shevney, and we'll talk about your book. We're just about out of time, but one of the things you say in your book is a culture that has abandoned God will seek for a God substitute. People don't cease to be religious. They merely replace one religion with another. And I think when you realize that this isn't just like Democrats and Republicans arguing about big government and small government, this is religion. That your mayor of New York is preaching a religion, not just a different way of governing. And that is something that our kids are getting from the universities, especially now, is religion that is contrary to the Christian faith, and we need to begin there.
Amen. I agree.
Yeah. Tell us about your book real quick and where people can get it.
You can get Post Woke, Asserting a Biblical Vision of Race, Gender, and Sexuality wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble's, ChristianBook.com. And you can pick up the older version we have is Critical Dilemma. It's longer, thicker, more comprehensive, but both are great. The latter, Post Woke, though, is much more concise and practical and written for parents to equip your kids. So I hope you pick it up.
Real good thing to do, and do not assume this is something that's going away. This is something that is religion, and it's growing right now. You need to know about it. Go to postwokebook.com, or you can get the book wherever books are sold. Post Woke: Asserting a Biblical Vision of Race, Gender, Sexuality, co-authored by Patrick Sawyer and Neil Shenvi. Neil Shenvi, thanks for joining me on the Pastor Scott Show today.
Thank you so much.
All right, this is the Pastor Scott Show. Go to pastorscottshow.com for podcasts, social media, and more. We'll be back as the Pastor Scott Show continues. Stay tuned.
The Pastor Scott Show returns in 3 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 2 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 1 minute and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 1 minute. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 15 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 5 seconds. Welcome back to the Pastor Scott Show.
You've made me think about hospitality and compassion.
Call Pastor Scott now at 888-528-2557. That's 888-528-2557. Now back to Pastor Scott.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Pastor Scott Show. We are live on Monday. Great to be with you. Go to pastorscottshow.com to connect with us online. Phone number, if you want to join the conversation, is 888-528-2557. 888-528-2557. Hey, did you go to Harvest Crusade 2026? Clip 21. That is the sound of being in the crowd there. If you've never been to a Harvest Crusade, it's an amazing thing to be in the crowd and singing those songs. That was Phil Wickham leading Our God is an Awesome God, Saturday night at Harvest Crusade 2026. And I was blessed and had the opportunity to do the radio broadcast with our own David James, Big Wave Dave. And that goes on 600 stations everywhere. That's one of the most amazing things, I think, about Harvest Crusade, other than what actually the Lord does in the field and all of that, is that the Lord's doing that all across the country, even in some other places. Did you go? And you have a story to share, a good story of somebody you brought, or what maybe the Lord did for you at Harvest this weekend? Call right now, 888-528-2557, 888-528-2557, 888-528-2557. You know, it's for me, you know, there's so many different ways when you look at these kinds of things. Because for most people, if they come to Christ at something like this, they have been in process for a while. Somebody's been praying for them. Somebody has maybe brought them before to a Harvest Crusade, or maybe brought them to church or church events, or maybe they go to church on Easter, or they've had some kind of conversation about it. But what happens ultimately in our life, you know, what our life is about. And one of the things I always look at, too, for people who go is not just the people who give their life to Christ or rededicate their life to Christ, which happens at these things all the time. And thousands of people came down to the field and did that at Harvest 2026. But it's also the people who brought them, the people who, I think, in the back of their mind, for not all those people, but for many people, many of us, we've got people in our life who we think they're never coming to Jesus. And sometimes we think that because they are so lost in drugs or alcohol or behaviors or other things, we think they're never going to repent, they're never going to want to. Sometimes it's because, and maybe more often, they're more lost into the philosophy of this age. You know, we were just talking about that with Neil Shenvi. I think I mispronounced his name like half the time, but it's Shenvi is what it is, Neil Shenvi. And, you know, we're living in a time where he's right, that religion, if people are going to reject God, then they're going to find religion somewhere. That if you're going to reject a belief in God, you're going to find some kind of religious notion. You have to, because if you don't, then you're just sort of untethered to anything that's related to purpose or meaning. You've got to have it somewhere. And if there's no God, you're in a lot of trouble, because if there's no God, if there's no cosmic sense of justice or cosmic sense of morality, if there's no higher word from above about the purpose of this life, then you got to get it from people. Right, you got to get it from other people who you know darn well are not very, are not perfect. Who you might have some people that you revere and people that you respect, but you also know that they're capable of doing maybe some terrible things, or at least that they're not perfect. And that's your standard. That's the best you got, is some imperfect person who has tried to live a good life and been relatively successful more than others. But if that's all you got, that's not very comforting. And then at the end of time, the problem is, and this is where a lot of atheists, especially philosophical writers, find their trouble with all of that. It's in that if there is no God, if there is no cosmic justice of some kind, that means there is actually no morality. That means that our sins go unpunished. Our murders, our racism, our rapes, our whatever it is you want to say, abuse of children, those kinds of things, you might get confronted with those things by law enforcement in this life and pay the penalty for that here, but you might not. And if you don't, then there's no punishment. There's no justice. It's just evil. If there's no God, then it really is survival of the fittest. And you can try to become a secular humanist, and you can try to develop some kind of moral thinking. But even that, it all turns into, you know what, this is what I need to be comfortable in this life so that I don't get arrested, so that I don't offend the people near me. But it becomes just all about ourselves, all about us. And there's no mission or purpose to that. It's just how to defend yourself in this life and live the best life that you can and get away with whatever you can. And that's real depressing if you think about it for longer than a few minutes. When you come together at something like a Harvest Crusade, what you see are people from every background who come there. And you see so many people who come down in that field who have recognized that they're looking for what's true in the wrong place. They've been looking for meaning and purpose. And to get back to the people who brought those people, the people that you think to yourself, oh, that person's never getting saved because they're lost in that philosophy, or they're lost in their behavior, or they're just so committed to being anti-Christian that they're never coming. And the tragedy is sometimes we just don't even invite them. We just stop telling them about Jesus, and we stop praying for them. Don't ever stop, because one of the things that you see every year at Harvest Crusade is those people on the field who go down there with the person who brought them. And I often see the people who bring them in tears also. And you kind of look and you can kind of tell, you can kind of tell when you're looking at somebody who is emotional, what's behind that emotion, right? You know the difference between anger and sadness. You know the difference between different kinds of grief and different things. You can kind of look at somebody and say, and have some idea of what's going on. It's not perfect, but you get a sense. And when you talk to the people who are in tears and emotional because the person they brought has gone down to the field, the person they brought, so often what you hear is, I never thought I would see this day. Sometimes I hear, I've given up on him. I hadn't prayed for him for years. Suddenly this came up and I said, you wouldn't want to go, would you? You probably don't want to go to the Harvest Crusade. And they said yes. I was surprised that they said yes. And they came. And they hear the worship, then they hear the message, they hear the gospel proclaimed, and God does something to their heart. And I think it's always a lesson for us when we have events like the Harvest Crusade and so many people give their life to Christ at these things. It's always a lesson that says we should never give up on anybody. Because I'll tell you what, a lot of the people who are down there, they're pretty hard. They're people who have been, around the block a great many times, very often, or they've been obstinate. They have often just sort of said, you know what, this isn't for me. Sometimes they have an intellectual reason. And as we were talking about in our last segment with Neil Shenvi, we are entering a time, and probably a time, where the national religion is going to be, he might use the term wokeism, but what it is it is a godless form of existence, where the idea is that in that religion, there's no God, so the religion has to be ourself. The religion has to be the state. The religion has to be whatever source of humanity I can grab onto with some level of trust. And the reason it doesn't work is that it all falls apart. Every government has got major problems and falls eventually. Every system ultimately has problems. Every human being is fallen and is going to disappoint. And most of us disappoint majorly at different times in our life. That's just how that goes. And that's part of the fallen nature of things. And then here you have a message from Pastor Greg where he just makes it really clear is that, hey, all of that's reality, but there's a better way. There is one who will not fail you. There is one who came to be with you. There is one who came to teach what is true about society and about who we are, and who's one to come and say, I love you, that I made you, and I want you to be with me, and here's the way. Trust me, is what Jesus says. Give your life to me. Follow me. Trust me with what is true. And you know what? When you trust Jesus, one of the things that you see, this is the Pastor Scott Show, 888-528-2557, talking about Harvest Crusade. And if you got a story to share, now's a good time to share it, 888-528-2557. One of the things when you trust Jesus and you follow Jesus is you find out that he's consistent. You find out not only is he consistent, but when you study his life, when you realize who he is, he dies, he gets executed, and even though multiple trials found him innocent, and then just like he said, 3 days later, he comes up out of the grave. He defeats death. And I don't know if you realize it, but death is the enemy. Death, we want to say academically that death is something that just happens, right? It's a circle of life and blah, blah, blah. And that's true to a certain degree, but there's no hope in that, right? Is there something else? Most people think there's something else. Jesus says, yeah, there is something else, and I am the way, follow me. And what Jesus does is he goes into the grave and then he punches a hole in death and he walks out through that hole. And for those who are following Jesus, they get to walk out of that hole with him, even though they will die, even though they will suffer and deal with things in this life. They will walk out of the grave victorious over death into everlasting life, where the promise is there'll be no more tears, no more sadness. And you get that not by being a great person, not by being good, not by checking things off your list as far as moral rules or religious activities. You get there by trusting Jesus. See, the morality and the religious things that you might do, they come along with following Jesus. If you really believe that Jesus is Lord, if you really believe that he's the way, the truth, and the life, then you're going to want to obey him. Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Like, that's the evidence. It's not even going to church or doing religious routines. It's you'll keep my commandments. And part of that is confessing your sin, repentance, those kinds of things. It's also loving others as you love yourself. It's also loving the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength. It's love others as I have loved you, Jesus said. You will want to do that. You'll be imperfect. You'll never get that right. Some people get right a little better than other people. That's kind of the way it goes, but they're not earning salvation. The interesting thing is the person that you know who's the most holy, right, who really is closest to God in their walk, right? They're walking closer to Jesus than anybody you know. That person still needs a Savior as much as you do. Just the same. As perfect as they might seem to you, number one, they're not that perfect. The Lord knows their heart. Secondly, so what? The comparison isn't you to him. The comparison is you to yourself before Jesus and you to yourself when you have Jesus. So when you have Jesus as your Savior, and one day you're standing before the judge of all eternity, and he looks at you. When you have Jesus, he sees Jesus. He sees perfection that you need, and that's why you get eternal life. This is the Pastor Scott Show. Go to PastorScottShow.com to connect with us online. Did you go to Harvest Crusade, and what is your story about it? 888-528-2557, 888-528-2557. We'll be right back. Pastor Scott Show.
The Pastor Scott Show returns in 4 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 3 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 2 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 1 minute and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 1 minute. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 15 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 5 seconds. Welcome back to the Pastor Scott Show.
Hey, man, God bless you, Pastor Scott.
Call Pastor Scott now at 888-528-2557. That's 888-528-2557. Now back to Pastor Scott.
Welcome back, everybody. Pastor Scott Show. We're live on Monday. 888-528-2557 is the number. This weekend on Saturday was the Harvest Crusade 2026, and I thought I'd throw it open. If you went to the Harvest Crusade, what is your experience, and what did the Lord teach you? Maybe you made a commitment to Christ or a recommitment, or you know somebody who did. You got a good story with what the Lord did. Maybe you watched it online. Maybe you watched it in the chat. There's so many different ways to do that now. What's your story with that? 888-528-2557. 888-528-2557. We'll come back to that here in just a second. Hey, I want to tell you about Sanctuary Metals. Sanctuary Metals specializes in helping you move part of your IRA or 401k into physical gold and silver, not just paper investments that rise and fall with the stock market. If you've got an old retirement account, maybe from a previous employer, or if you're over 59 and a half, you might be able to roll it over with no taxes and no penalties if you qualify. It takes about 15 minutes over the phone with Sanctuary Metals. You can call them right now, 800-801-9877. What I like is they do everything over the phone, so you don't even have to go into their offices. You can just call over the phone, 800-801-9877. And it takes about 15 minutes. Your metals are stored safely in IRS-approved vaults, so you don't have to keep them under your bed if you don't want to. Give them a call, 800-801-9877. Tell them Pastor Scott sent you to see if you qualify for a no-fee-for-life precious metals IRA. You can learn more online at sanctuarymetals.com. Sanctuarymetals.com. Past performance does not guarantee future results. All right, Pastor Scott Show, 888-528-2557, 888-528-2557. You know, as we think about the Harvest Crusade, 36 years they've been doing that, 36 years. Pretty sure I went to the first one back in the day. I was at college at UC Riverside, so I was right out there, and went to that. What's interesting is the world is so different. If you started listening at the top of the hour, we had Neil Shenvi talking about just the ideologies of our day and how really it's religion that we're seeing in so many ways that has left God, but some kind of new religion that is in the critical line of thinking, critical theories of all kinds of ways. You know, why is it that people think that men can actually become women or have babies or things like that? How can people, you know, push views that are not true scientifically? Why can we do that today? It's because it's an ideology. It's a religion, those kinds of things. That's why. And, you know, culture matters, ideas matters. It's important, I think, for us, very important as the church to understand the times that we live in and to think biblically about them. That really matters. But the core things in our faith, the core things about the gospel, they work all of the time throughout any era in history. So that doesn't mean you can ignore the questions of the day, because you can't really have a very good conversation with somebody. Maybe you brought someone to Harvest Crusade and they heard the message and maybe they didn't go forward. Maybe they have a lot of doubts or they have a lot of questions. You might have had those conversations afterward, which I think is great. You shouldn't be afraid of those conversations. But you do, I think, need to have those conversations where you're living in 2026 and not 1975, right? Where you're addressing the issues of the day, the issues that people are being confronted with today about humanity, about things like gender, about all of the different subjects that are put forward in our schools and everywhere today. It's not hard to be prepared about that, because I think that at the end of the day, you do a lot of listening and then you still point people back to Christ. That's why for 2,000 years, the scriptures and the gospel has been persuasive in cultures all around the world and still is. That is because it's facing a fundamental truth about us. What's our purpose? What is the reason that we were here? I was talking before about people who bring people forward at the Harvest Cafe or Harvest Crusade, people who brought their friends, and those people go forward. You know what your purpose is in your life? You ever think about that? Maybe you think of it as your career, or maybe you even think of it as something that you enjoy doing. All of those things are part of it. But at the end of the day, if you brought somebody to Harvest Crusade, or you brought them to church and one day they receive Christ, one day you see that person getting baptized, your purpose in life is that. I don't know if you realize that or not, but your purpose in life actually is that. The people that God has placed in your relational world, the people that God has made you an ambassador of Christ for. Like your purpose, the reason God made you, the reason God put you where you are in the job, in the career, with the skills you've got, even the way God uses your life in different ways, even the way God addresses things in different ways in your life. The purpose is ultimately to make himself known to the people around you. And yes, to you, to grow in your faith and do all of this. But here's something you should know. This is the Pastor Scott Show, 888-528-2557. If you want to join the conversation, 888-528-2557. Your purpose is not to worship in this life, if that makes sense. Like, it's something you should do. But the thing is if that was your purpose, then God would have already brought you to heaven. Because as great as the worship is, maybe in your church, or maybe it was Saturday night at Harvest Crusade, it's not as good as it will be in heaven. And if that's your purpose, he should just bring you there, right? Your purpose is not to serve at your church for the purpose of serving. You should serve at your church. You should try to help. You should try to make things better. But the reason you're doing that is so that the people who are coming who need to know Jesus actually get to meet Jesus and have a good experience, and everything works, and that you've taken responsibility for those things, not so that you're a good volunteer, or maybe you're on staff, a good staff person or pastor. The purpose of that is so that the people who need to hear the gospel hear it clearly. The purpose that you've got in your Christian life, and maybe you don't see it, you've never thought of it this way, but the purpose is about the people that God has placed in your relational world at any given time. Your coworkers, your classmates, your next door neighbors, your family. You have a responsibility, I think, to represent Christ to your family, maybe first and foremost, your friends. And it's not just people that you like. It's even people that you don't like. It's the people who are in your life. God has put you there on purpose to represent him. There is a statistic that says only about 20% of Americans actually go to church regularly, whatever regularly is. Like every week, I think is what that statistic is, about 20% or once a month, something like that, which doesn't seem regular to me, but there you go. But the truth is that most people, almost everybody, actually goes to church every week. And the reason I can say that is because most people are around somebody who is a Christian person with the Holy Spirit residing in themselves every week. Almost everybody has some Christian that they work with, some Christian that they interact with, some Christian in their family, somebody that they talk to who loves Jesus, who's a part of their life, who they work with, or they go to school with, or they go to class with. And maybe that person's only in their life for 3 months during a college class. Maybe they're only in their life for a short period of time because they're in the apartment across the hall. Maybe they're only in their life because you work together and then somebody moves to a different department or gets another job. Okay. But in that period of time, when they're with you, they are at church. I don't know if you realize that, but particularly in America, I would say, with very few exceptions, every American is at church every week because they're interacting with some Christian. That's what the Lord is doing. That's what is happening. And, when people come to Christ, almost all of the time, it's because somebody invested in them, somebody prayed for them, somebody shared the gospel with them. It's usually a family member. It's usually a close friend. It can be one of those people, a coworker. It can be a classmate or a roommate you got stuck with. When people share their testimony, how'd you become a Christian? They often will say, well, I came forward at church, or I came forward at a Harvest Crusade. And sometimes they went by themselves, and sometimes they have been very lonely and they don't know any Christians, and the Lord drew them to that place. And that does happen. And those are incredible stories, right? There's a story of a Harvest Crusade where a guy shows up on his own and he's a mess. And nobody invited him. He just saw a billboard and decided to go at the last minute, and he gets saved, changed his life. That happens sometimes, and that's an amazing thing. But most of the time, when people, even though that might be the moment of decision, Harvest Crusade or at church, at altar call or wherever it is, most of the time, that person has been prayed for. That person has been spiritually invested in by somebody they know. Somebody they know in their life actually shared the gospel with them at some point. And maybe they didn't receive it at that point. Maybe they received it later. But there has been a process going on that involves you and me. And when I would do a baptism, one of the things I like to do is ask the people, when I'm about ready to baptize somebody, ask the people, hey, if you've been praying for this person, if you were the one who shared the gospel with this person, if you have done this or done that, would you also stand right now? And I remind people, hey, your purpose is what's happening right now with this baptism. The reason you were born is so that this person would hear the gospel, so that you would pray for them, so that you would be a part of them coming to the Lord, so that you would walk down on that field at Harvest Crusade with them. And you know what? If I could just ask you, how many of you came to faith because you heard the gospel from somebody you knew, or somebody brought you to Harvest Crusade, somebody brought you to some event where you heard the gospel and accepted it? 95% of you put your hands up. For 2,000 years, the way Jesus has grown his church is by discipleship, by people making disciples of each other in this way. It's an incredible, incredible thing. The success of the church, it's gone from something like I think the statistic is 1 in 12 million people at the beginning of the church at Pentecost who believed in the world, who believed in Jesus as Savior, to now it's about 1 in 12 or 1 in 8, depending on the statistic you read, in the world. Who, I'm not just talking about people Christian, born in a Christian country, got baptized or something. I'm talking about people who profess Christ as their Lord and Savior. It's gone from 1 in 12 million to 1 in 12 in 2,000 years. That's how Jesus is growing his church. And he does it with you and me. And so what I would ask you to do is, even though Harvest Crusade won't be for another year, maybe you're going to go to the Night of Hope in Nickerson Gardens here in Los Angeles this weekend. Maybe you've got something else going on where you are. Don't think that everything happens just because of those events. Those events are tools for you to share your faith, to let people know you love Jesus. And it's as simple as, I was blind, but now I see. I was lost, but now I'm found. We all have that testimony in one way or another. And the people who need to hear it from you, they're the people who need to hear your version. It seems to me that that's the way it works out. That the people who come to Christ, they needed the people that God put in their life purposefully and providentially so that they would come to Christ. All right, this is the Pastor Scott Show. Go to PastorScottShow.com to connect with us online, PastorScottShow.com. When we come back, hey, how you doing with reading? What's the last book you read? 888-528-2557. 888-528-2557. We'll be right back.
The Pastor Scott Show returns in 4 minutes. Pastor Scott Show returns in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 3 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 2 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 1 minute and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 1 minute. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 15 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 5 seconds. Welcome to the Pastor Scott Show. Call Pastor Scott now at 888-528-2557. That's 888-528-2557. And now, here's Pastor Scott.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Pastor Scott Show. We're live on Monday. Great to be with you. Go to PastorScottShow.com to connect with us online, PastorScottShow.com. Phone number is 888-528-2557, 888-528-2557. We talk about issues of the day from a Christian perspective. Go to clip 21.
So my research found that there has just been a sharp decline in reading across age levels, across genders, across socioeconomic status, as you mentioned. The the share of Americans who read a book or even an article on any given day has declined by 40% in the past 20 years. I note in the piece that gambling is now a more popular leisure activity than reading.
That is a author who just wrote an article for the Atlantic magazine that is suggesting this, that we are entering a illiterate age, that the end of reading is here, that people are not going to read any further, and that this is it. And the reason is that Americans have stopped reading for the most part, stopped reading books, stopped reading larger pieces of information at one time, that this is something that is going to transform society, and we should be aware of the fact that people are not actually reading. What was the last book that you read and that you would recommend? Like an actual book. When was the last time you sat down and decided, I'm going to read a book? 888-528-2557. Maybe it's a work of nonfiction. Maybe it's a work of fiction. Maybe it was something fun. But what is the last time that you actually sat down and read a book? The studies say that most of us haven't. In fact, you just heard her say that more people are gambling today than actually reading books. How can that be possible? I guess that's the way it is. 888-528-2557 is the number. 888-528-2557. Her name is Rose Horowitz, and she wrote this in The Atlantic, and here she is talking about it, 22.
You know, we might be reading more words than ever when you think about messages we get and emails and, Reddit posts and just everything that we're taking in all the time, but that reading so many words has actually taken away from our ability to focus for an extended period of time on, a rich and complex text.
So what she's talking about is the idea that it's not that people aren't reading. I mean, there's a whole different part of this article talking about people just can't read, but that people are reading, but they're reading Reddit posts, they're reading Twitter posts, they're reading short, pithy statements that you see online or your Facebook, that in some way you might be scrolling on your phone and watching videos, and maybe you're reading comments and you're reading stuff, but you're not reading anything that deepens your understanding of something generally. You aren't reading books. You aren't going through and actually understanding the book. And the thesis of the article is basically that reading is becoming something that is a minority activity, meaning that fewer people are just going to read. That's just the deal. The article starts out talking about the history of the Library of Alexandria, and it was a symbol of civilization's belief that preserving written knowledge was essential. And one of the big tragedies in the world is that was lost, right? We don't know a lot of that history that was lost at that period of time, or other things that people wrote, novels and stories of different things. She says this: fewer than half of American adults report reading a book in a typical year. So less than half of us adults are reading a book in a year. Reading for pleasure has declined sharply over the past 2 decades, meaning that you're not going to the bookstore or Amazon or somewhere and picking up a book because you like mysteries or because you like adventure books or sci-fi books or whatever it is. We've just stopped doing that. I've noticed that. Remember a few years you go to Costco and there would be the whole center of the store would be 2 or 3 rows of just books. Every book was out there. It was just book, 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 book. Now there's one table, and it's not very many actual novels or history books, or biographies. It's sort of gift books and things like that mostly, but there's very little reading, if there is any at all. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I don't even know if that table is still at Costco. So do you read? What was the last book that you read, and what would you recommend it? What book would you recommend to somebody? Maybe somebody's saying, yeah, I had to read a book. Well, what would you recommend for them? 888-528-2557, 888-528-2557. Carol in Costa Mesa, welcome to the Pastor Scott Show.
Yeah, I like books. I especially love reading to my grandkids, of course, and I really want to suggest Patricia Polacco from the Children's Library has so many good, real books, but the one that my Bible study group did for the summer, we usually do the Bible, of course, but we also did this summer The Ark Builder's Wife, which is it's historical fiction, all fiction.
Like a fiction, is it Noah's wife, Ark Builder's Wife?
Exactly.
Huh. What was that book? So I know obviously it's fiction, but what was their take? That sounds like an interesting story.
Exactly, because the people were mistreated. I mean, the whole family was put down. It was hard for them to live like a normal life because here they were doing something so obnoxious as building a boat in the middle of nowhere, with no water in sight.
Yeah,
They,
and being mocked.
yes.
Yeah, and that's interesting from her perspective. I hadn't really thought about that, but that's an interesting idea. But so you like that book? Was it just fun, or was it insightful as to maybe think about what do you do if your spouse has a project they believe in and you're not too sure?
Yeah, it went more than that. It went, into our whole problem why God wanted to destroy the whole world, and personalized it for Noah's wife Zara in this case. She had past problems with idol worship and stuff like that
Hmm.
herself. So
So there was a lot in it that is, from her perspective. But that's interesting. That helps people think. That's an interesting suggestion. Carol, thanks for calling the Pastor Scott Show. It's called The Ark Builder's Wife. What's a book that you've read recently that you would recommend? 888-528-2557. 888-528-2557. Responding to an article that is coming up in the August issue of the Atlantic magazine called The End of Reading is Here. And the summary of Rose Horowitz's argument is that we're entering a post-literate age, is what she says. That people's ability to read, we're already seeing problems with that in the schools, right? But where that's leading us is to a place where people are just not going to read. And so what's happening is her theory, and I think this is what is borne out in the statistics, is it's not that everybody can't read, but fewer people are willing or able to engage in sustained deep reading, she's talking about, like an entire book. And she suggests that this is going to transform society. It could lead us to a place where we just stop learning as a society. I think it's a really big deal. As a Bible believing Christian, people are already struggling with reading their Bible, even just a few verses a day. How if people can't have the attention span to read a book, how are we going to learn, and how are we going to analyze even what we understand? 888-528-2557, 888-528-2557. She points out that even groups that are traditionally who read the most, college graduates, women, retirees, those groups read more than anybody in recent years, they're reading significantly less than before. That reading a book for, voluntarily, not because you were assigned it in a class, but you just decided, I'm going to read a book. That's ending for a lot of people. 888-528-2557, 888-528-2557. What is the a book that you have read recently that you would recommend? 888-528-2557. John in Chatsworth, welcome to the Pastor Scott Show.
Good afternoon, Pastor Scott. How are you?
I'm good, John. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, Pastor Scott, two things I wanted to say. One is I've been reading John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath for a long time. I don't want to tell you how long I've been reading it. It's a challenging book because when he wrote it, he did a masterful job of writing in the language of sort of the Oklahoma people who were coming west.
Right. It's hard to read it.
It's a difficult book. But I have been enjoying it, and my parents grew up in that time frame, and so it sort of rings with me, in sort of a family sense, I guess. But the thing I wanted to say, Pastor Scott, was I work with young people in youth development programs inside and outside of the church, and one thing that I've noticed, and I don't know if this is related, but I think it may be that young people can't write, Pastor Scott. They really struggle with just basic penmanship. And I was working with a group of young people on a project that required some writing. And one young lady had magnificent penmanship and very clear, dense printing. The rest of the kids were just they could barely do it. And I think there's a relationship
to being able to actually write. So you don't mean even just formulate thoughts, but you mean handwriting, like just legibly.
I absolutely. It's a huge problem with young people.
A lot of people stopped writing, teaching cursive in schools, right? And one of the purposes of cursive is you can write quickly. Printing takes forever, even if your printing is neat, it takes even longer. And I'm somebody with bad handwriting, as far as my cursive went. But I can fill out stuff pretty quickly. It's almost legible. But I think you're right. It's a lot worse today, generally.
And I think this loss of reading skill is related to the loss of writing skill, and I'm afraid it just impacts young people as they start to grow and start to engage with the world, and even engage with what they're learning in church.
I think all of that is correct. All those things go together, right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. You needed to do all of those things. And all of those things are suffering in every state across the board in our country is struggling to various degrees, and especially California in those areas. Like the fourth grade number I just read is just horrific. And
I hate to have to do it, but I have to sort of dumb down the writing requirements for these advancement projects in scouting, and if I don't do that, they just don't make it.
Yeah. So what would you tell somebody who there is a movement among some younger people that is on the opposite side of this, where what they are doing is they are reading the classics like The Grapes of Wrath, and then they'll do a little TikTok about it. And I find that to be encouraging, that there are young people who are saying, I'm going to go back and read these books. So you're talking about The Grapes of Wrath. That's a hard book. How would you encourage a person at any age to keep up with it, just push through it?
I think you have to take it on in sort of the fresher part of your day. I'm not sure that the last thing before you go to bed at night is when to do it. And maybe with a little of caffeine by the side and a highlighter, and with that book, you're going to have to, now, did I understand what was really being said there? You might have to read it again, but you just have to stick with it. It requires a little work and a little focus and a little diligence, I guess, and don't do it the last thing of the day.
Yeah, but I think that's pretty good advice. But you can do it, right? That I think you can push through it. And what I found with stuff like that is that at first it's hard, but eventually you kind of get the rhythm of it, and then it's much easier once you push through it a little bit. John, thanks for calling the Pastor Scott Show. 888-528-2557, 888-528-2557. We're talking about the idea that we're entering an age of the end of reading, that people aren't reading books, and that there is a consequence to that is very, very critical for our culture. I'm wondering if what's a book that you've read recently that you would recommend somebody read? 888-528-2557, 888-528-2557. This is from an article that is called The End of Reading is Here by Rose Horowitz in The Atlantic. Here's some more that she had to say about it. Go to 23.
Yes, and so I spoke with someone who works at Harvard who was saying that their students now sort of more and more report seeing reading as kind of an unnecessarily difficult way to take in information when AI can summarize everything for them. And so they're sort of having to convince them much more that, no, there is something really important about reading the whole thing, seeing the words that the author wrote themselves, and not getting this short summary. So it's really a change in attitude as well.
So the other thing that she's talking about is people just find it so hard that they don't. So there's a couple of things that people are doing today is they take the text. So maybe you're reading The Grapes of Wrath or some book that is old, and they insert the text into ChatGPT, and then it spits it out in what they're saying is modern English. The Grapes of Wrath is difficult, But there are books that are not that old that are written in normal English that people are having trouble with. And as part of that, here's part of the article that I want to read to you because this is just an incredible, incredible thing. It says reading has come to seem extraneous to even to some of the best educated members of society. Margaret Renix, Harvard's assistant director for humanities and social sciences support, told me she's spoken with a student who was struggling to read a book written in Old English, she said. The culprit? Anthony Burgess's 1962 novel, A Clockwork Orange. The student used ChatGPT to translate the book into easier language. Now, I think that book's probably a little bit difficult, but it's 1962. It's not Old English. It's not Shakespeare. I had to read Shakespeare in middle school, and I hated it. But I pushed through it. We had to. We had an exam. We had to do it. You can do it, right? So this person, though, is at Harvard, not a middle schooler, Harvard, and can't read a book written 60 years ago in English. And then the article continues this way. Not long ago, a Harvard sociology professor, troubled by course evaluations in which students said they resented the amount of dense reading they were assigned, asked Renix to speak to his class in defense of reading. She had to explain to students at America's most elite university taking a course in a discipline rooted in written observation, argumentation, and analysis that excerpts and summaries cannot capture the depth and sophistication of a complete primary text. Renix told me that some students now view reading as an unnecessary, burdensome way of acquiring knowledge. I'm going to read that again. This is Harvard. This isn't middle school. I might have said to my middle school teacher, Mrs. McKinley, making me read this is an unnecessarily burdensome way of acquiring knowledge. I would have said that in some middle school way. She says, this is Harvard. And by asking them to read, by asking Harvard students to read in a class that is about reading things for analysis, to ask them to read, she said, professors, this is the student, the professors are arbitrarily withholding information from students by forcing them to get through this more difficult medium.
How dare you?
That's at Harvard. So what this student is saying is this student is being assigned a book that's hard to understand because it's written in Old English, even though it was written in 1962, A Clockwork Orange. And what she's saying is not, I'm having trouble reading this, can you help me? Or I need to have the discipline to go through this. What she's saying is the professor is a bad person and is withholding information from students by forcing them to get information through this difficult medium called reading Old English from 1962.
Humiliations galore.
That's Harvard. That's a Harvard situation. That's what this article is about. That the idea that reading is an unnecessary, burdensome way of acquiring knowledge, and by telling the professor, this just sounds like some of the crazy, crazy stuff that's going on in our world today. I mean, you think of all the insanity that we're seeing today. This is part of it. You are blaming the professor at Harvard for assigning a book that for some reason is too hard for you to read. And you're not just saying that this is too hard for me to read. You're saying that you're doing a bad job as a professor. In fact, you're withholding information. That's what it says. You're withholding information because you're asking me to read a book that I can't understand. Therefore, the problem isn't me. The problem is you. You're withholding information because I can't read the book that you're asking me to read while I'm at Harvard. I can't read this difficult medium. That's nuts. That has to change. And this is the highest, most elite school probably in our country, and that's what's coming there. My friends, this is a crisis. This is a crisis. So it's more than just this, and we'll come back and we'll talk about this a little bit more and take your calls, 888-528-2557. Part of the reason it's not just bad education and bad education system, and we're not teaching phonics, and we're not teaching people these things. We made everything electronic. It's not just AI. All of those things are a piece of it for sure. But it's also something that has gotten into the ideology that we're dealing with today of saying, I don't need, because it's hard for me, you're a bad person, and it shouldn't be this hard. We cannot do that. That's going to create huge problems. So I wanted to ask you, what is a book that you've read recently like all the way through, that you would recommend? It can be a important, serious book. Maybe it's just something you read for fun, a nice mystery or something. 888-528-2557. 888-528-2557. Pastor Scott Show will be back in just a moment. Charlie, Denise, and others as we take your calls as the Pastor Scott Show returns in just a moment. Stay tuned.
The Pastor Scott Show returns in 4 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 3 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 2 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 1 minute and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 1 minute. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 15 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 5 seconds. Welcome back to the Pastor Scott Show.
I love your show. I listen to it every morning on my way to work, and I listen to you on the way coming home.
Call Pastor Scott now at 888-528-2557. That's 888-528-2557. Now back to Pastor Scott.
Welcome back. It's the Pastor Scott Show. Go to pastorscottshow.com to connect with us online. Phone number is 888-528-2557. 888-528-2557. 24, please.
As you were saying, what we've seen that, adults today, they used to really like reading. And, some of the things that were sort of most nerve-wracking to me as I was writing this piece was the statistic that only 2% of American adults read to a kid on any given day. And so we definitely can expect that this is only going to intensify in the years to come because the younger generation is much less interested in reading. And yes, as you say, we know that reading is kind of this way of taking in information where you have to go down the page. You have to take it in kind of logically. It trains your analytical skills if you're really thinking about it. And so that is at risk now.
That is Rose Horowitz, who wrote an article called The End of Reading is Here, talking about how Americans have, for the most part, stopped reading for pleasure or for reasons other than what you have to do. Maybe you're in a class, you got to read a book, or you should, those kinds of things. And one of the problems is, and only about 16% now of Americans actually read for pleasure, meaning they go read a book, an actual book, for the sake of just reading it. Like they don't have to, they just want to do that. One of the problems and one of the arguments that she makes, and I think accurately, is that reading books, it's different than videos or podcasts, social media, other mediums that people engage in so much. Reading long-form books helps train the mind to be able to think and to be able to make arguments. Reading long-form works develops habits such as sustained attention, patience, inference, can infer things, empathy, complex, real empathy, complex reasoning, following long chains of argument. And when those habits disappear and we don't have the attention span, then it's really hard to formulate an argument or understand why a person believes something that they believe. And I think we're seeing that. I think we see that in our society. So I thought I would ask you, what is a book that you've read recently that you would recommend? And then challenge people, maybe if you haven't read a book recently, grab something. Go read something on purpose, a book, get all the way through it. Push yourself through it. 888-528-2557 is the number. 888-528-2557. Charlie in Westminster, welcome to the Pastor Scott Show.
Thank you. The Religion of the Apostles is a 2021 book written by an Orthodox priest, and it's not difficult. I dispute the idea that if something is difficult or old or archaic, it's more important or smarter than what's written today. This one alleges that Christianity was not a new religion. I know this isn't a new idea, but he points out really well that it's a continuation of Second Temple Judaism, and that Christianity is older than Rabbinic Judaism, which came a couple centuries later. That they changed the faith of Judaism.
So this is a book that you would say, and I have not read this book, so, as far as where it's coming from or what it means, but you would say this would help people get an idea, at least of somebody's perspective of long-term faith. Yeah, and the idea that we're not hostile to Judaism, he says at that time, there were different variations of Judaism, and you know that better than I do. I would recommend it just because it maybe fills some gaps in some thinking.
Huh?
Maybe it fills some gaps in some thinking out there.
My thinking, yeah. I realize that people have said it before. That we're authentic to the Old Testament, and we are. But he spells it out very well. The guy's name is Stephen with a PH, DeYoung, and then the word young, like young man.
Okay. Well, you know what? Books like that, would you say that it's hard to read that, or do you read a lot, Charlie?
Well, I'm 76, so I fall asleep too easily. But most of what I read is noir. My two favorite authors are Robert Stone and another man from Boston who write crime fiction. But yeah, I read books about our faith.
Yeah. So you read about our faith, but you also read crime fiction, and you enjoy it.
Oh yeah, and I write short crime fiction. I used to be a process server and a paralegal, and I've been around the block. I appreciate stuff that really rings, and I think different stages appeal to different people. And just because you're a child of the '70s like I am, doesn't mean you're smarter or dumber than my dad, who was a child of the Depression and World War II. But
Yeah. Well, Charlie, I appreciate your phone call. Thanks for calling the Pastor Scott Show. 888-528-2557. 888-528-2557. If you want to know, there's all kinds of books out there. I always remind people that Christian books or books about religion, they're not the Bible. There's a reason they're not the Bible. But they can help you understand, or they might give you a perspective that's not even accurate. But if you can't read, then you can't read between the lines. You can't understand where maybe that person's coming from, or you can't read another book that has a different point of view. This is something that culture is dealing with, but for those of us as individuals, we can still turn it around and read something. 888-528-2557. The studies are suggesting that we are entering a post-literate society. I hate that term. It's scary. The idea that we can't read or won't read. It's not that we can't. Many people can't, but it's that we won't. A post-literate society. You know what that means? It means we're going to rely on artificial intelligence for everything. And the problem with doing that is artificial intelligence is only a computer program that pulls from whatever known knowledge might be out there and does its best to sort of coordinate it in such a way that might be accurate. But if no one is writing new stuff, then we're coming to the end of knowledge. And AI is wrong a lot of what it does. Or what if the stuff that it's telling you, the consensus is that it's right today, but new science or new discoveries, new understandings come around later that says, no, all that's wrong. If we are no longer capable of building an argument as people, of paying attention, we're going to be just believing things that are false. And I'll tell you what, when you believe something that's not true, eventually it smacks you in the face. Reality bats last. It just does. 888-528-2557. What's a book that you would recommend? Something you've read recently and enjoyed, or maybe you didn't enjoy it, but you pushed through it. 888-528-2557. Ellen in Woodland Hills, welcome to the Pastor Scott Show.
Thank you for taking my call. Growing up, I didn't read too much, honestly. But in my adulthood, anything by Philip Yancey is so fantastic and so simple to read. So I highly recommend that. There's The Jesus I Never Knew is the title that he wrote. Church, Why Bother? What's So Amazing About Grace? They're all, his writing is so easy to read. So I highly recommend that. And just for fun, a series by author called Jan Koran, Koran, I believe is her last name. And the Mitford series, so fun and so funny. That it's not a religious book.
But it's fun.
It's so fun.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and I appreciate your phone call, Ellen. 888-528-2557. What's something that you've read recently or that you would recommend to other people, especially if somebody's listening saying, I should read more? Because I find that if I'm personally not reading something extra, most of what I read feeds into my job, right? It feeds into the show, some understanding of different issues, and it And that's, I would say, the last book that I completed was Animal Farm by George Orwell. Read that recently because that movie came out. I thought we'd probably talk about it, but nobody went to see that movie. So, which I heard was good that nobody saw it, because they changed the meaning of that book. But when you read that book was about communism and you know, all of the arguments that were made then on that Animal Farm about what truth is and the way the animals, if you read that book, manipulate the truth, the leaders, and how it affects the people, and how violent that book is. It's terribly violent. It's an important book to read for today. You know, Orwell, that guy. You know, read that book. Read Animal Farm. Read the actual book. It's not very long. Read 1984, and then pay attention to the fact that those were written in the 1940s. Those books are extraordinary and very prophetic. Got the year wrong, but amazing books if you want to understand what's happening today, I think. 888-528-2557. Cecilia in L.A., welcome to the Pastor Scott Show.
Hi, Pastor Scott. Okay, this isn't a Christian book. It's called All the Light You Cannot See.
Okay.
And it is just, it was so good they made a Netflix, I think it's a mini-series out of it. It's just a little girl who loses her sight and what her father does to let her see the world. Oh my gosh, it brings tears what he's done for his little girl and how she's able to see the world through everything that she's gone through. And it takes place, you know, during the war. Takes place in France. So there's bombing going on, and
so there's adventure and other stuff. All the light you cannot see. All right, Cecilia, thanks for calling the Pastor Scott Show. All the light you cannot see. 888-528-2557. You know, she mentioned that. I Googled it while she was speaking there. There's a Netflix version of that book. So that's one of the issues today is, do you read the book or do you just watch the movie? You know, I think it's interesting to do both, but better to read the book first because then you know what they did in the movie to change it or where they got it accurate. But the movies change things a lot in books. What's a book you recommend, something you've read recently? 888-528-2557, 888-528-2557. We'll be right back with your phone calls on the Monday edition of the Pastor Scott Show. Stay tuned.
The Pastor Scott Show returns in 4 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 3 minutes. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 2 minutes. Pastor Scott Show returns in 1 minute and 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 1 minute. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 30 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 15 seconds. The Pastor Scott Show returns in 5 seconds. Welcome back to the Pastor Scott Show.
Hi, Pastor Scott. I love your show. Just want you to know I love, love, love it.
Call Pastor Scott now at 888-528-2557. That's 888-528-2557. Now back to Pastor Scott.
Welcome back, everybody. Pastor Scott Show. We're live on Monday. 888-528-2557 is the number. 888-528-2557, number 8.
Who's looking after your wife and son?
Do you see?
My dad is coming home.
Bringing vengeance. Bringing it all.
That is a clip from the trailer for the movie, The Odyssey, that's coming out pretty soon. There's a lot of thought about whether it be controversial or not based on ways that movies change books and things. And of course, it's a 3,000-year-old book, The Odyssey by Homer. I was forced to read that in grade school or high school. I can't even remember now. I was 8th grader. It was freshman year. And it was rough. I'll be honest with you. But you know what? The reason books like that stick around is they teach perseverance. They teach the longing for home, wisdom over brute strength, faithfulness, pride, humility, all kinds of things that are important to human beings. That's why those kinds of books stick around for so long. Well, we've been talking about how a article in The Atlantic is suggesting that we are at the end of literacy, that we're going to enter a post-literate society, and it's because people don't read. People don't read books. They don't read long form. They read their Twitter feed and they read scrolling and they read certain things on Substack. And there's some people reading more than others. But if you think about it, newspapers are virtually gone, actually getting the paper and sitting down and reading through it. I go online every day and I read certain articles from papers, but I do that because I enjoy it, I guess. I also do it because it's my job. But what was the last book you read and what would you recommend people read? So I would recommend to everybody, you should be a reader, that it will increase your abilities all the way around as human beings. It will help you think. It will help you learn. That's one of the article's main points in The Atlantic, is that this is detrimental to us and our ability to think, to make arguments, to understand things. Ultimately, it says it's going to be a end to democracy, because one of the ways that you destroy your country is you make everybody dumb. You take away their abilities to understand or be educated. And sometimes you just got to educate yourself. 888-528-2557. What would you recommend people reading? Or what's a book you read recently and why? 888-528-2557. Lori in Santa Barbara, welcome to the Pastor Scott Show.
Hi, Pastor Scott. I like to reread The Pilgrim's Progress.
All right.
And they have, different versions for different age levels. And my daughter was the experiment year when they got rid of the textbooks and gave everybody the iPads. She's not going to read a book unless it's a college required book. So I just send people like that app to the movies to watch a free movie version. for this younger generation.
At least they get some part of it, right? But I appreciate that Pilgrim's Progress. You know, there are all kinds of studies coming out right now that says that the moment that technology was introduced in the classrooms, it just tanked everybody's ability to learn. I don't have it in front of me, but there's a university professor somewhere who he was giving take-home exams to the class, and everybody was passing. The average grade in his class was 89%. And then he thought to himself, I don't feel like they're being honest. They're probably cheating. They're probably using AI, all of that. I'm going to make them come in and take the exam in the classroom. And do you know that the average score went from 89 to 49 because of that? That's a huge deal. I was laughing about that with, it's not funny, but talking with James about that, my son. And he was like, oh, I'd love to have a take-home exam, I said, well, would you go online? He said, of course I would. I thought in my day, we had some take-home exams, but they were hard. You got to the point where you don't want a take-home exam. It was too difficult. You'd rather just go to the classroom and get it over with. 888-528-2557. Nikki in Palos Verdes, welcome to the Pastor Scott Show.
Oh, hi, Pastor Scott. I wanted to recommend a book that I've just read, and it's by David K. Harper, who's a presenter for the Antiques Roadshow. And the book is called The God Conundrum. And he puts underneath, An Easy Guide to Life, the Universe, and Everything. And on the front cover, there's a beautiful picture of a DNA going straight up to the cross through the clouds. It's really
Is that the story,
book.
too, of how, I think that's, if I'm familiar with it enough, he investigates Christianity. He's not a Christian at the beginning, and then he becomes one as the book goes forward. Yeah.
It's a wonderful book. I would recommend it to anyone. I bought several copies and have given them away. And a non-Christian might enjoy it, too.
The God Conundrum.
Yes.
Well, and I think it's for people who aren't Christians, right? In the sense of, hey, this is my journey, and I didn't believe, and now I do, and here's why.
Well, yes, but Christians might read it in order to get themselves back to where they were thinking about becoming Christians and see how it would be for other people to see their journey.
That's right. That's right. I think that's a great recommendation. Nikki, thanks for calling the Pastor Scott Show. 888-528-2557. Tim in La Mesa, welcome to the Pastor Scott Show.
Yeah, I'd like to recommend a book called Sent Out by Ken Kopelson.
Okay.
Kenneth Kopelson. It's about a young guy who was sent out on a missionary journey into the Alaska and Yukon, and the amazing miracles and things that happened when he relied on God. It was just an amazing book.
Sent Out. It says, Sent Out, how my journey as God's errand boy totally changed my life.
Yeah.
That's what it says. Okay, Sent Out. All right. Everybody can check it out. Henriette, thank you, Tim, for calling the Pastor Scott Show. Tanya in Glendale, welcome to the Pastor Scott Show.
Hello, thank you.
Hi.
There's two books that I just finished that I wanted to recommend that were just amazing. The first one was Stop in the Name of God by Charlie Kirk. And it's about observing the Sabbath and learning what that means and what that entails, and unplugging from everything for a day a week and being present with your family and with God, and just observing, getting to spend time with our Lord. It was a really good read. And then also Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus by Nabil Qureshi. And it was his story of being a devout Muslim and how he, through a friendship in college with a Christian and through heavy debate, went to disprove Christianity in support of Islam, and then he turned into a Christian.
Yeah.
And really amazing read.
That's a great recommendation. Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus is one of his books. Super good book. Tanya, thanks for calling the Pastor Scott Show. 888-528-2557. 888-528-2557. You know, and when we think about this, a lot of the books, not every book. We got some recent ones there at the end. A lot of them are older books. And some of those I think are still good to read, but there's new stuff out there that's pretty good. And I think it's fun to read, even if you're reading just something nonfiction that's fun, that is entertaining. What I would encourage you to do is be a reader. Yes, you should read your Bible. And, I would encourage you to not simply have a little devotion. I think that's good. But sit down and read an entire Bible book. When was the last time you sat down and you read the entire Gospel of John? Like, you just sat down and read it. And I mean by, don't even get into a Bible study right away. Just read the whole book, all the chapters. Just read through it. And you can come back and you can study it later. But just read through those books. Read the Gospels. Read an entire book of the Bible and then just read through it. I think you get, so often even in church, if we're doing a Bible study, we take a few verses here and we really get into it. And that's great. It's important to do that, to understand. But when you just sit down sometimes and just read the book, you get a feel for it that's a little different. You get a feel for it that I think is very personal. And find some stuff out there that is just fun. Good mystery writer that you like. If you read a book for an hour a day, first of all, if you read the Bible for an hour a day, you just read through it like I was saying, you'll be done in 3 months. July, August, September, sometime in October, you'd finish the whole Bible if you started today and read for less than an hour a day. Do you know that? The whole Bible, like before the holidays, you will have read the whole Bible. Most Christians have not read the whole Bible. You won't understand it. Most Christians haven't read most of the Bible. You won't understand all of it, but you'll understand the big picture and you'll understand the story. It's incredible. Find a book that's just fun to read. These things help your mind. And one of this article that we're talking about the end of literacy, is suggesting is that our social media in particular, and just the short form things that we're doing, even short form viewing, it's ending our ability to pay attention for very long. It's ending our ability to stay on topic. It's ending our ability to think critically about things. And I think what we're seeing in the world today, when you look at our politics and you look at so many different things, obviously we're not thinking very critically. Obviously, we're living in a world that is having trouble holding on to reality and the things that are obviously true. And some of it is because we are just so busy with so many things, or we are so into entertainment, we don't take time to really work out our minds. That's just an encouragement to you. Go read, recommend something. If you're a younger person, you know what? You will get ahead. I told my son this last night. You will get ahead in life if you're a reader. You will do so much better if you just read. Just sit down and turn the TV off, put the phone down, do that and just read. And the studies are showing that to be true. Do that. Man, I got so many things I would read. Read anything by Thomas Sowell. If you want like a political or philosophical view of things, just anything. Basic economics. Start with that. Brilliant. Probably the most brilliant guy. One of them writing in our lifetime. C.S. Lewis, some of those old guys, but there's some great stuff out there from some new Christian writers. Find some things that will challenge you. Go read some old stuff. Go read Lord of the Rings and then go watch the movie after that. Lord of the Rings, hard to get through, but it's worth it. It's a great book. Shelley's recommending Anne of Green Gables. We're out of time, Shelley. And if you are still waiting online, you can call us on Friday. We do open line Friday and call about anything on Friday. So you can recommend anything you want on Friday and bring the subject up. This is the Pastor Scott Show. Go to PastorScottShow.com, PastorScottShow.com to follow us online, PastorScottShow.com, podcast, live stream, and all of our social media. The social media is at Pastor Scott Show, at Pastor Scott Show. We will see you tomorrow live once again from 3 to 5. You can find our stations and everything at PastorScottShow.com. Everybody have a great night, and God bless. See you tomorrow from 3 to 5.